Yes. No, leave it open for a minute. All right, so there's a number of topics that were covered with this practice COC, and I think it pretty much was a fairly well-rounded review of what the material we covered. Here, there's no real questions here, but let's take a look at this and say, when you're asked, one of the topics that you might be asked is to summarize the structure and function of organelles in eukaryotic cells. And you know what those organelles are, and at this point, I'd expect that you know what each of these does. If you do not, you should become aware of them. The nucleus, the plasma membrane, cell wall, mitochondria, vacuoles, chloroplasts, ribosomes. At least those. We've covered a number more. A number larger than this. Right? Cytoskeleton, the cell the plasma membrane, we went into detail. And knowing this is great, but knowing the details, for instance, what are integral membrane proteins? What are signaling proteins? How do things cross the membrane? Those are all important aspects of this knowledge as well. So this is all covered under this kind of objective. Let me take a look at this sample question. A runner is competing in 10-kilogram track meet. Just before completing the race, the runner is nearly out of breath, right? And the energy needed to finish the race. So he's out of both the breath and the energy needed to finish the race. Which cell structure is most affected by this lack of energy? Mitochondria. That's right, because this is where what is happening. You know it's not shown on the board. No, I did not know that. Thank you for saying that. Excuse me. All right, there, the problem's fixed. When we're looking at the mitochondria, remember what's going on in the mitochondria? What are we doing? ATP synthesis. Now, in general, we went into a lot of detail on this. So now my question is, what does out of breath have to do with ATP synthesis, making that energy? And the mitochondria. What does that have to do with anything? Why were those, what's going on? Yeah. Corman, go ahead.
Because the mitochondria uses oxygen to help make ATP.
That's right, because of oxidative phosphorylation, right? Because of aerobic exercise. Aerobic. The aerobic pathway. Let's remind ourselves. Glucose comes in, and without oxygen, without the need for oxygen, gets turned into what? 2 pyruvates. Right? Is that right? Now from there, from those 2 pyruvates, this is obviously a big summary. Those 2 pyruvates then can go one of 2 ways. If there's no oxygen, in humans, they go through what's called fermentation. What kind of fermentation? In humans, lactic acid. So it's going to produce lactic acid and a very small amount. Yeah.
I was saying this is over the 2 types of fermentation.
Yeah, small amount of ATP. Just as small. Do you have to know the number? Probably not. Not for this exam. Not for this end of course exam. But you have to know it's a small amount. We can get into the numbers again. Remember when we did the audit, we did the numbers and we went through all this, yes? Back in months ago. So fermentation, a small amount of ATP. That's in humans and other mammals. In yeast, which, bless you, which are a type of fungus, right? in yeast or fungi and bacteria, what do they produce? And some bacteria and some yeast, what lack of oxygen, sugar would produce alcohol. And that's alcohol fermentation. All right. Now that is how we make alcohol. When we think about drinking beer or wine or what have you, all those alcoholic beverages are made by way of alcohol fermentation. You close up a bunch of grapes that have sugar in them in a big old wooden barrel, and you add some yeast, you let it sit for a few years, and all that sugar gets turned into, or some of that sugar gets turned into alcohol. Is that understood?
How do you make regular alcohol?
Huh?
So how do you make regular alcohol?
I can't hear you.
How do you make regular alcohol?
I don't know, what do you mean by regular alcohol?
Like some
Rubbing alcohol is, well, it used to be made the same way. What you would do is you would go through the fermentation process, and you would ferment, you would allow bacteria to eat whatever sugar, right? So it could be from grapes, and then you get wine, right? It can be from rye, and then you get whiskey, right? It could be, bless you, it could be rice, and you get sake. Do you understand that? It's a Japanese alcohol drink. Do we all understand that concept? I don't know. Are we all listening? So if you took that alcohol, that stuff that was made that people can drink, that's diluted, right? And you distill it. So you heat it up to about 70 degrees, and you evaporate the alcohol, you collect it in what's called a distillery. All right, okay. So anyways, the point is that you have to separate these liquids. They're mixed well, they're in a solution, right? Two liquids in a solution, they're mixed really well. How do you separate alcohol from water, from grape pieces, and etc.? Well, obviously the first thing you would do is filter out the solids, right? That's easy. But now you got a bunch of liquids mixed in there, sugar, water, solutes in solution, etc. So what we do to clarify, all of you have gone and bought, I believe, probably have at least been with your parents when they bought distilled water in a jug or in a glass. Purified water, they might call it. So there's several ways to purify water, but what you can do then is take and use heat, and here's the water in a container. The container has just one little hole, a little tube that comes out. It wraps around. This gives it time to cool off. All right, this is a tube. I'm drawing a tube. I know it's horrible. I don't want to hear it. So, as this thing gets up to 100 degrees Celsius, all right, the water would boil. Is that correct? Yes?
Yes.
All right. So anything that doesn't boil at 100 degrees, like metal doesn't, right? Salt doesn't. So if you have salt water, for instance, you could boil the water. The water would evaporate, cool off in the tube, and then what would happen on this end? What would happen is it cools off. Yeah. Come on, guys. The water evaporates at 100 degrees. The different solutes evaporate at much, much higher temperature. So the water evaporates, it's starting to evaporate, it turns into gas. Where's the gas going to go? It's going to go into the tube. As it goes through the tube, it cools down. What happens? This is boiling. This is called boiling. What happens over here on this end? Yeah, it cools down. What do we call it? What is it? It goes from here, from liquid.
Condensation.
That's right, you're right. To liquid to gas. When it goes from gas, as it cools off, it goes what? From gas to what? To liquid. And we call that condensation. So these are called condensation coils. And so as they cool off, the water then recollects over here. So here you had salt water, and various minerals or whatever, right? As you boil, if you take it up to 100 degrees, then you get your purer water, clear water, purified water, right? We also, another name for it is called distilled water. A lot less, if not zero salt, right? This is H2O.
Can't people like clean water? I feel like seeing a show where people clean water with like rocks in a water bottle.
Yeah, you can filter stuff out that way, but you can't get rid of the salt because the salt is, they're ions in the solution. They're actually smaller. Remember how a filter works. I'm kind of not getting way off the topic here, but look, a filter works because you have a grid, right? And the water molecule is small enough to get through the grid, right? But the bigger chunks of stuff can't fit through. Does that make sense? But the ions, the sodium and the chloride, the salt, and the calcium and etc., they're actually smaller than the water molecule. So they're going through the grid too. So it's hard, you can't filter out salt easily. Is that clear? There are some methods of using osmosis, what we call reverse osmosis, to separate the water and the salt. We can do that. Your kidneys do something similar, by the way. Your kidneys purify your urine. They take out the water. They purify the water out. They keep the water in your blood, and then that's why your urine is so concentrated. So when you urinate, your urine is mainly water from your blood, right? But it's been filtered through the kidneys, and using different salt concentrations and osmosis, you're able to reabsorb the water, as much water as you can. That makes sense because you don't want to lose too much water because you die, right? So when you see concentrated urine, that's your body filtering out, pulling back all the water it can. So in any case, that's filtering, that's distilled. The difference is when you're dealing with alcohol distillation, you're not going to purify water. What do you want? You don't want the water over here. What do you want over here? You want the alcohol. And this is after you've let the thing sit for a while, you got alcohol and water in here. You're still going to use the same process, but now instead of 100 degrees, you take it up to 70 degrees. Now 70 degrees is too cool for water to boil, right? So it doesn't really boil. Some water will get in there, but mostly it won't boil, right? It won't turn into gas. So what's turning into gas then? Alcohol. Solids don't. The salt evaporates, salt melts at thousands of degrees. Here we're talking about around 100. Do you see the difference? The scale is completely, mind-blowingly different. Let me pause. So it turns out that alcohol boils at 70 degrees. So when you pour alcohol on your skin, which is around 90 degrees, what happens to your skin? How does this feel when you pour alcohol on you? On your skin without a cut. Do you ever put alcohol on your skin when it's not cut? Feels cool. The reason it feels cool is that it's evaporating. It's turning into gas immediately because it boils at 70. It's boiling on your skin. It starts to turn into gas immediately. And so when it does that, when it goes from liquid to gas, it takes energy with it. That heat is taken away to do that. In order to change to gas, it takes heat. Where's it going to get that heat from? Your skin. And so that's why it feels cool to you. Okay? So that's called evaporation. That's how come sweating works. Sweating cools you off because as the water turns into gas, because you're hot, right? You're working out, you're hot. As the water turns into gas, it takes energy with it. That energy comes from you, so it feels cool. Yeah.
So it's like doing that when you put it on your skin, that's why it burns.
Say that again?
Since it's like evaporating when you put it on your skin, is that why it burns when you do have a cut?
No, it burns when you have a cut because it literally, it kills. life, right? It's a poison. That's why it's not a good idea to drink it. And I know we all, people like to drink it. I've occasionally had a few drinks as an adult. I don't really do it often because I know it's really bad for you. It actually kills your brain cells. Your nerves can't take alcohol, so they're most sensitive. So obviously when you have a cut, you have a lot of nerves open, and so that's why it hurts, because your cuts are like, ow, it's poison. It's really has a lot more to do with, we could talk about nerve impulses and the damage you're doing with the alcohol and how you're dehydrating the tissue and all that, but let's not get into that, all right? All right, so at 70 degrees, the alcohol boils. The alcohol's leaving, but water doesn't boil to 100, so as long as you keep it around 70, the alcohol is going to turn to gas, cool off, and then what's going to be over here? Alcohol. If you do that a number of times, you get purer and purer alcohol. Does that make sense? And so this is how we get, this is how you distill alcohol. This is how you get the hard liquors. The softer, the wines and the beers, they're just fermented. They're just all, you're drinking all the fermented stuff, right? The leftover hops, the leftover rice, or not rice, because sake is not. But, oh yeah, I think sake is. So the leftover rice, the leftover grapes, whatever, they're all in there. They're filtered out with a filter like this, but you get all the little flavors and juices. When you distill the alcohol, it becomes harder. It becomes much, much more concentrated alcohol. Pure alcohol. Okay? That's that proof. Have you ever heard that 200 proof, 100 proof, whatever? You ever hear that? All right. Oh, that's the term that they talk about. Proof. Proof. The larger the number, the more alcohol there is, the less water. You don't want to drink these hard liquors. They will hurt you. A number of students in college have died, especially drinking in the winter, from alcohol poisoning. Alcohol is a poison. You have to understand that. The only difference between poison and medicine is concentration. Yeah.
How long do you think you'd have to ferment Everclear?
Everclear is distilled liquor. Close the door. It's not she's talking about moonshine.
What?
Moonshine or Everclear is just this distilled, this process being done, and traditionally it was done in the mountains of Tennessee and Kentucky and what have you. Moonshiners they call them moonshiners because they would do this at night because it was illegal. And they'd have their stills in the hills of Tennessee and Virginia and Kentucky, and they would be distilling the liquor. And they get this here, because it's distilled, it's clear. So Everclear. The clearer the alcohol, the more alcohol there is, the less of the other things. That's why grape has grape's color, because the parts of the grapes are still there. The pigments of the grapes are still in there. But you've gotten rid of all the pigments, all the plant material and all the bacteria when you're up here at the Everclear level. It is not okay to drink this stuff. I'm warning you. And people will tell you, don't worry about it. They don't know these teachers don't know what they're talking about. Don't worry about it. Listen, I'm telling you, drinking alcohol is one of the biggest things in our culture. Now, of course, we've tried prohibition. You've learned about that in history, yes?
Yeah.
So we've tried prohibition. It doesn't work. So the best thing we can do is educate you and say, look, when you drink, if you drink, choose to do it in moderation. And certainly do not drink this heavy stuff, all right? Because this pure alcohol material can lead to a lot of issues. All right, that's enough of my. So that is fermentation. That's getting energy from sugar without oxygen. Do you remember? Everybody okay with that?
What did you say?
Getting energy from sugar without, did I say without alcohol? Without oxygen. All right, fermentation. No oxygen. Do you see that? Does everybody get that? Okay. Now, if you do have oxygen, that oxygen go where? Where's it going to go, those pyruvates? You remember you already got a little bit of ATP out of this, right? This is where you make the ATP. You're not making the ATP in fermentation. You're making it here in glycolysis, right? This is glycolysis, the breaking down of glucose. You're making ATP in glycolysis. You're making about 2 for every glucose molecule. A net. But fermentation helps the cycle going, keep it going, because you need NADP, NADH, you need NAD+, you need all the other components of the process. Remember, there were many, many steps. All right, so if you do have oxygen with alcohol, I keep saying alcohol because we were just talking about it, with oxygen gas, where are you getting the oxygen gas? Where are you getting the oxygen? Where are you getting oxygen? From what?
Respiration.
From what?
Breathing.
From breathing. From breathing. That's where you're getting the oxygen. So the oxygen, with oxygen, you're moving in this direction. Where are you going to go? Yeah, you're right. But where is the Krebs cycle? In the mitochondria. In the mitochondria, you have the oxygen going in, and then the first thing it does, it goes to the Krebs cycle. Remember, this is where CO2 starts coming out. This is where you're taking the carbons from glucose. I don't know why I drew the arrow that way. That was my bad. Those carbons from pyruvate that were originally from sugar, right? Those carbons from pyruvate, that's when this is where they start coming out. Out comes 6 CO2s, 3 for each pyruvate. 3 times 2 is 6. So 6 CO2s come out. This is where does this go? How do you get the CO2 out of you? No, how do you get the CO2 out of you? You get the CO2 out of you with breathing. Right? So there's a reason you're breathing faster when you're working out, because you need more energy, and all the trillions and trillions of mitochondria and all your trillions of cells all are trying to do this thing called aerobic respiration, and they need oxygen. So you have to breathe it in, but you have to get rid of this. So that's why you're breathing in and out so heavy when you're running around for your second mile. You got to get rid of the CO2, and you got to pull in enough oxygen to keep this going. If you don't, you die. This will not produce, fermentation will not produce enough oxygen. You know that because if you run any kind of distance, you know your muscles start to do what after a while? They hurt.
So how come some people...
They'll stop. You'll stop. The first marathon runner did what?
He died.
Died. At least legend has it. I don't know if that's true now. So anyways, the Krebs cycle then takes the electrons, puts them through the various electron transporters. What are those? Is NADH and FADH2. Remember, it's NADH in the mitochondria, and the chloroplast is NADPH as well as NADH. In any case, there's the FADH2, NADH. There, it's going to take all those electrons from here. The NADH is carrying the electrons from glycolysis and from glycolysis and from the Krebs cycle, and the FADH2 as well, is all going into what? Where are all the electrons going? Electron transport chain. So far, we have not used any oxygen, if you paid attention. The electron transport chain has a lot of different characters, and we tell you, quinone, right? Remember those electron carriers, and the electron transport chain is using hydrogen ion concentration across the membrane to drive the ATP synthase, right? The enzyme that's sitting in the mitochondrial membrane. And so you're making ATP as the hydrogens go from high to low. So just as a quick drawing, here you have a membrane. Here, there's your membrane. Here is your electron transport. Just using these electrons to tease these hydrogen ions to go from low to high, because they're high over here. There's a lot, very funny. There's a lot of hydrogen ions on this side. There's not a lot on this side. So in order to get these hydrogen ions to go up against the concentration gradient, you need energy. You're getting the energy from the electrons. Is that clear? Yeah.
So the electron transfer chain is like the
Active transport. So you're using the first part. The first part is active transport. So you're using all this to create these electrons. You're using active transport to create a concentration gradient. And that's high hydrogen ions on one side, low, high here, low here. Then you create an opening using this enzyme here. This enzyme is called ATP Synthase. What do you think this is going to do? Make ATP. That's it. It's going to do this movement from high, as it has an opening, as a channel. So here you have a channel. As this thing moves as these hydrogen ions move from high to low, it's going to happen, right? Because that's what's going to happen if there's an opening. This ATP synthase takes ADP plus a phosphate and turns it into ATP. And it does that really quickly. And you end up with total like 36 ATPs, not 1 or 2, but 36 ATPs for every glucose molecule. So you get a lot of ATP made. This is why. But here's the question. In the end, remember that game of hot potato that I talked about when we first talked about this? Is if you have this electron transport chain and nothing takes the electrons at the end, you get to the end of the chain and there's an electron, something has to take that electron. What's the final electron acceptor in this process? Oxygen is correct. Good, somebody remembers. So oxygen is actually half an oxygen molecule. So for every one of these electrons, each oxygen is going to take 2 electrons and 2 hydrogens, and it's going to make what? Water. It's going to make water. You'll make 2 waters for every process. For every 1 oxygen atom, a molecule, you're going to make 2 waters, because there's 2 oxygens and there's only 1 oxygen in water. So this is your final electron acceptor, and that's what's going to keep the chain moving, right? So you produce a lot of ATP through this process, and all of that content was tested with this one question. Isn't that crazy? Except for the distillation. That was just because you guys didn't know it from middle school, right? So everything else was tested here. Well, there's one question. Breath. Why is it runner out of breath? Because they need oxygen. Why do they need oxygen? Because you need to take the last electron so you can keep the ATP moving. Why do you need ATP? Because you're moving, you're running, you're exercising, you're playing basketball, you're doing whatever it is that you're doing to keep the process going. Yeah.
So what makes it like when people have to use more ATP than other people like?
What makes one person out of shape and another person not might have to do with how many muscle fibers you have. The more muscles you have, the more cells you have, right? The bigger they are, the more mitochondria you have. The more mitochondria you have, the more ATP you make. The type of muscle fiber you make, whether you have white or red muscle fiber, can give you either strength or give you endurance. How well you're able to circulate the oxygen, because remember, you have to be able to breathe it in, and then you have to get that oxygen to the tissues. Well, what are the 2 things that do that? Blood. I guess there's more than 2 things, but let's just talk about some of the main components of that circulatory system. The lungs You have to get the oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. That exchange point is the lungs. Someone mentioned blood. Yes, you need blood. So if you're some people that don't have enough iron, right? What do we call them? If you don't have enough iron in your blood, anemic, right? Or if you have sickle cell, you're anemic, right? Or if you have any number of ways you can become anemic. The anemic means you can't carry enough oxygen with the blood that you have. So that makes that person not as energy, doesn't have as much energy as the next person. Does that make sense? They're not going to be able to run the 20 miles. So someone who's not anemic may be able to run it. Then the other component, so we have the lungs, we have the blood. What else do you need to get that blood to the toes and then back up and circulate it?
The heart.
The heart. So what makes one person be able to run 20 miles, another person not? So it's how thin they are, because the thinner they are, the less ATP you need, right? That's why you see most long distance runners are pretty thin, right? You're not going to see Arnold Schwarzenegger, even though he's in shape, right? You're not going to see a muscle builder who's 300 pounds, even though they're in shape. Michael Clark Duncan, remember? I don't know if you remember him. He passed away, unfortunately. A great actor from The Green Mile and all that. But he was a real big guy, in shape. But there's no way that guy's going to run, 20 miles, because he's too big. So you see that it takes too much energy to get him to move that far. So a thinner person, less energy, right? Their heart is probably well formed, as well muscularized and vascularized, so it can function really strongly, so it can pump quickly and efficiently. And their lungs are probably fairly clear, and they're able to exchange gases quickly. They're probably not anemic. They probably have a lot of white muscle fiber, or is it red? No, red muscle fiber. I can't remember which one it is. That it's going to help exchange the gases and be efficient in the run. All these reasons make it so that someone can be a better runner than someone else. Question?
I was about to say, there's a lot of cholesterol on the heart. It'll be hard to
That's a good question. Cholesterol, how does that impact? Okay, so there's a big debate right now on whether how much cholesterol you eat actually impacts your heart, your circulatory system, how much it doesn't. It does not directly impact your heart. Eating cholesterol does not, or having high cholesterol doesn't stop your heart from moving. What it does is it starts to clog the arteries and the veins. It starts to produce what's called a plaque. You did?
Yeah.
So the high cholesterol will build up in the blood vessels and start to slow down that blood circulation, which would then in turn do what? Reduce the amount of oxygen getting to the tissues, and so you become weaker and weaker as you get more and more clogging of the artery. Now, the problem with heart attacks is that the part of your body that starts to get clogged up is to your heart. And if that happens, and then you get a blood clot stopping the blood flow, then your heart can't do this. It doesn't get any oxygen because it doesn't get any blood flow to that muscle, because your heart's a muscle. No oxygen flow means that tissue dies. Your heart stops. That's what we call heart attack. If you block the blood flow to your heart, you end your life. So, because then the blood, if the heart's not working, no blood gets to your brain or your kidneys or your liver, and that's it. Game over. Yeah.
Well, back to the marathon thing. Can't you like even if you aren't in the best shape, can't you train your body to?
Yeah, you can do all that I just mentioned, almost all of it. Sickle cell is an issue because that you can still train. You can still improve other factors. You're not going to change the sickle cell, right? But you can build up muscle fiber, like you say, make your heart more efficient, make your lungs more efficient. So exercise is still a good idea. Yes, you can train. You can train. You can lose weight. You can, by training, you start to grow the right muscle fiber. By training, you start to improve your heart's efficiency, your lungs' efficiency. So yeah, training, exercising. That's why Michelle Obama and the federal government since World War II has been trying to encourage students to get out there and exercise. That's why gym is a required course in high school. That's why everybody tells you exercise. For all those reasons and more, exercise is a good idea. And exercise does not mean you have to get up and run 3 miles. Exercise could mean a daily walk. Exercise could mean a basketball game. Exercise could mean, but you have to get out and move. Breathe heavy. If you're not breathing, if you're not sweating, you're not working. So you see all these people at the gym that don't sweat. They're all in their pretty suits and whatever, and they work out, and then they're just prissy and smelling good and walking out the gym. There's something that did not work. All right? If you're not sweating and breathing hard, if you don't see someone, people make fun of people because they're breathing hard. If you're not breathing hard, you're not working out. Yeah.
So once a person stops working out, how does their body start to change back to the way it was?
Your body's always going to change. Changes the dynamic nature of your body. Your body adapts to the various environments in
What
that.
happens to the muscle fibers? How do they
You start to atrophy. They start. If you ever see someone in a wheelchair, you'll see that their legs are almost. If they're not going through therapy, their legs are almost devoid of muscle. And the reason that is they're not using it. So if you don't use the muscle, your body reabsorbs it. You lose the muscle fiber.
smart?
But that's anything. Anything you don't, that's what I don't know if you know this saying, but if you don't use it, you lose it. That's why it's important to keep your brain moving. Keep always continue learning. It's important to continue your learning process, even if you have a job that doesn't require it. Not for the job, but for you. And so you always have to find a hobby or something to keep your mind flowing. Challenge your mind. Learning a new language is always a good one. Thinking, yeah. For your brain. That's another story. All right, moving on. It's a lot for one question, but let's go on. What can be used to distinguish between eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells? Everyone should know this. What is the answer? What is the difference between eukaryotic cell and prokaryotic cell? Yeah, obviously it's D on the answer choice. It's highlighted. But the question is, what is it? It's not just D. No membrane-bound organelles. What is the nucleus? A membrane-bound organelle. When scientists first looked at these cells under a microscope, they looked at your cells and they looked at a bacterial cell. The first thing they noticed is that your cells and plant cells and all the other cells, all the eukaryotes, they had this big old ball in the center of the cell. Dark spot in the center of the cell. They called it the nucleus. They noticed that the bacteria did not have that. Today we know the nucleus contains the DNA and RNA for the cell. Right? The nucleolus has the RNA, the DNA, is where RNA is kept and made. Where DNA is made where? Where's DNA made? Where's it kept and made? In the nucleus for eukaryotes. Prokaryotes, there is no nucleus. It's just a little region of the cell, a little space where it sits. So prokaryotes, no membrane-bound organelles. No mitochondria, no chloroplast, no Golgi body, no endoplasmic reticulum, rough or smooth. They do have ribosomes because ribosomes are just RNA. They're enzymes that are just RNA. They are organelles that do not require membranes. All right. And we know why to this day. Remember endosymbiosis. We think we understand why that is because our membrane-bound organelles were a product of evolution. We know that bacteria, remember we said that one single-celled organism swallowed another single-celled organism back in the day, and you had a mitochondria. Yet that single-celled organism it swallowed was able to do cellular respiration really well, and as it got phagocytosed, right, as it got swallowed, the one membrane surrounded another membrane, you got a double membrane system, which is why when you look at a mitochondria, there's two membranes, right? Yes?
So the prokaryotic cells have lysosomes?
That's a really great question. I'm going to say probably. I'll say yes, but the type is probably different. So, like, they have ribosomes, for instance, but the ribosomes are smaller, which is another more evidence that the mitochondria and the chloroplast used to be a separate organism, because then not only do they have their own DNA, by the way, trick question, I hope they don't ask you this on the end of course exam, but the mitochondria and the chloroplast have their own DNA, all right, different from your DNA, and they have their own type of ribosomes, and they have double membranes. So there's a lot of things that they have in common with bacteria. Yeah.
If ribosomes come from protein synthesis, and protein synthesis could start with the nucleus, how do prokaryotes have ribosomes?
Like, you just killed my last question.
All right, so you're asking which came first, the chicken or the egg. I'll ask you a better one, right? Which came first, DNA or RNA?
Oh, mind broken.
We're still figuring this stuff out. So some people think RNA. It makes sense. We think viruses are a product of mistakes, right, in the process. But what if viruses were the first form of life? We argued that in this class we argued that viruses aren't alive, right, because they're not cells, so they don't fall into our definition of life. Some virologists argue that they are life, just a different form. So there's a lot of things we're still trying to figure out. Now, your question is a little deeper than I want to get into right now. We're already it's 8:46, so I'm gonna move on. But I'd love to discuss that with you. There's a lot of really good points that you made, but there's a lot of good counterpoints, a lot of good discussion. Now, remember, ribosome, the RNA is in the nucleolus and DNA is in the nucleus in a eukaryote. But prokaryotes have RNA and they have DNA and they do protein synthesis. They just do it all in one room. Remember we talked about the difference between a house and a shack? The prokaryote's a shack and the eukaryote's a multi-roomed house, right? So the only difference really between the two, we're all life, all of us are related. We have a lot of similarities to bacteria. Bacteria are long lost cousins, all right? Going back, if you follow the theory of evolution, right? You have to remember that we are related to them. All life started as bacteria on Earth, right? So this evolutionary process explains the question you have. So that question you asked is actually explained by evolution. How is it that if we are so different, that we share so many common functions, yet they might do it just slightly differently? That answer is evolution. But the details we'd have to discuss. So anyways, eukaryotes contain membrane-bound organelles, prokaryotes don't. You know they're going to ask you in a really tricky way, right? So you have to remember, you have to use the knowledge you have. It can't just be you memorizing it and expecting them to ask you do this kind of question. This is really easy. If they ask you this question, good, but they're going to ask it in a tricky way. All right, constructed response. Let's move on, because I think we discussed enough about cells right now for this initial review. You should be taking notes. I'll be grading notes from now until the end of course exam. So occasionally I'm going to say, upload your notes. What am I expecting to see? All the stuff that I put up, Cornell notes, I'm expecting to see. The stuff up here, Cornell notes, by the way, I expect to see processing. I expect to see thinking. If I don't see thinking in your notes, if you don't demonstrate some thought and some discussion, I'm going to say there's a problem. All right, so here's a molecule on one side, A and B. What's likely going to happen? Somebody tell me. What's going to happen here? A and B in diffusion. And then once they equilibrate, will the movement stop? No, they'll just keep going equally in both directions. So that's easy. I hope they give you a question like that, not like the one I gave you on your test. Unfortunately, I suspect they're going to give you like the one I gave you on your test. That's from a standardized exam. I didn't make up these questions. I give you the questions they give me. Student observes a typical onion root tip and successfully mitosis. Which statement best explains what must have happened as a result of cells only have half the chromosomes as all the other cells in the section of this tip? So I'll read it again. Student observes a typical onion root tip. You should have done this over spring break, right?
Yeah.
Where many of the cells have just successfully completed mitosis. Which statement best explains what must have happened to result in cells that only have half as many chromosomes as all the other cells in the same section of the tip? It's mitosis. We're not talking about meiosis. So had it been meiosis, it would be good. So this cell, whatever it is, must have gone through mitosis, must have split the nucleus before it could have went through the second interphase again. Because what happens during interphase? You double the DNA. So the only way you get to keep the same amount of DNA is if you double it before you split it. If you don't double it before you split it, then you have the DNA. That's what happens in meiosis, right? The second meiosis, there's no interphase, so you get to half the DNA. Yeah. That's right. It's G1, S phase, G2. It's a cell cycle, right? It's G1, S phase, synthesis or the DNA replication phase, and G2. Then you have M phase or mitosis / meiosis. Then what's the last piece there? Cytokinesis, the splitting of the cell. All right. Cell cycle checkpoints. All right. The cell cycle, which we just talked about, as checkpoints of proteins monitor, regulate processes, cell cycle in eukaryotic cells. Which statement best describes what will most likely happen if the cell is permitted to progress mitosis without preparation stage of interphase, without the checkpoints? What would happen if you allowed the cells to do mitosis without checking? Won't have the same number, won't have the same quality. Maybe you'll have the same number, but you won't have one of mom's, one of dad's. You'll have both moms on one and both dads on the other. Who knows? Yeah.
It could probably, eventually become a cancerous like cell that just doesn't stop and it overgrows.
That's right. Without the checkpoints, there's nothing to stop this thing from continuously going through mitosis and cytokinesis and growing into a tumor, right? And that's always a problem. So this is called the cell cycle here. This part of this cell cycle, this part here, let me make this bigger. I guess this is big as it. See this all here, this whole thing here is called what? That's right. It's called interphase. Since that didn't work out too well, let me do it a different way. So when we're talking about the cell cycle, starting from cytokinesis, all the way around to here, all the way to here, this whole area of the cell cycle. So this whole section of the cell cycle where you're going from G1, including G0, this whole thing is interphase, between phases. Between what phases? Between mitotic events, between cell divisions. So when they say interphase, they mean everything from here to here. Then M phase is the cell, is the mitosis, is a division of the nucleus, and of course cytokinesis is here. So that's your cell cycle, and honestly you need to know that this is where you're doing your DNA replication. S phase. So when they ask you the question, you know, a lot of people are like, I just want to know the answer. Well, okay, you know the answer to this question. In fact, this question, they gave you the answer. And some people, like one of our colleagues right here, they wanted to get to the questions where you don't know the answer to. But my point that I'm trying to make is that just because you know the answer doesn't mean you understand why the answer is that way. And if you don't understand why the answer, it's understanding why the answer is that way that's going to allow you to answer the next question. Because you don't know what question they're going to ask you on your standardized exams. So they're asked you this question, they want to know how is it that a cell gets half the DNA. If you imagine you did mitosis without doing S phase, without doing interphase, then you would have half the DNA. Because you're splitting the DNA in half, the cell in half, splitting the nucleus in half, splitting the DNA in half, but you're not doubling it. You see that? If you don't do interphase, you don't double the DNA. That's why this answer is correct. All right. Let's go ahead and go on. All right. Single-celled organisms placed in fresh water. Contractile vacuole pumps excess water out of the cell. How does this action help organisms survive? And it keeps, so you have your here. Here's a single-celled organism. Let me draw it differently so you don't think of it as just a prokaryote. Let's talk about a eukaryote. It has to be a eukaryote because contractile vacuole is a membrane-bound organelle. So here's this eukaryote. Here's a contractile vacuole. It's just a membrane-bound organelle that takes in water. If there's too much water coming in, where's that water going to go? It's going to go into here. Into the vacuole. Then what's the vacuole going to do? Pump it out. Every time too much water comes in, the contractile vacuole pumps it out. Why is that happening? Because it must be a freshwater lake, right? Because what is moving that water across that membrane? There's one word. Osmosis. Water is moving from low concentration of ions to high concentration. In fresh water, there's low salt. And inside the cell, there's higher salt. So fresh water, you're going to need that contractile vacuole pumping out that water. Otherwise, it'll just explode. We got it? All right. It says use your analysis of the system, right, to briefly tell how carbon is related to the flow of energy and cycling of matter between the environment and the organisms. So this is actually pretty complicated, but it's also not that hard since you learned it already and you've learned the basics. So let me ask you, where's the energy coming from in this system that you're looking at right now?
The light.
The light. This is coming from the light. So the light is analogous to what?
The sun.
So that's the sun. Now what's capturing that light energy and turning it into chemical energy, into sugar?
No, the plants.
The plants is right. These plants are what are going to take, they are what we call the producers. Everybody should know that. There should be no question. That's where you're making sugar. You're making that glucose. Just to remind you, that's through photosynthesis. There's through photosynthesis. And remember, that means taking CO2. What is CO2? Carbon. And making sugar. Where is it getting the CO2? From the air. Are we clear? It's not pulling CO2 from the ground. Plants don't take this carbon CO2 from the ground. They take it out of the air. They use chloroplasts, which are the organelles that make sugar, that capture sunlight, using photosystem 2, photosystem 1. They break down water, all the stuff we study. Okay, those are the producers. The animals and bacteria, they are what? The consumers. The snail, the bacteria in the water, the mushroom. The mushroom is not a producer. It's a consumer. It's a consumer. It eats dead things, but it's still a consumer. All right. Now, you need to know that these water droplets and the carbon dioxide actually holds in the air, holds in energy. It sucks in energy. It makes this whole area hotter. The more CO2 you have, the higher the temperature. We call that global, when it comes to the Earth, we call it global climate change. The higher CO2, the higher the heat. You trap the heat. Also, the CO2 cycles, doesn't it? It goes from the air into the plants, then the animals eat the sugar, and what did we just learn that animals do? What do we do with sugar? ATP, and what's a byproduct in the Krebs cycle? What comes out of the Krebs cycle? CO2. CO2. Go back, watch it. When you watch this video, go back and listen to it and look at the process. I'm not going to draw it again. But what you'll see is that when the pyruvate gets, when you rip the electrons off to send it to the electron transport chain, the pyruvate gets turned into CO2. You breathe it out. So these animals, these fungi, the bacteria, they're all producing CO2. What's taking the CO2 out of the air? The plants. And the plants put oxygen in, and the animals and the bacteria suck in the oxygen, and so it goes back and forth. Very clear, beautiful relationship that will make this environment, assuming nothing else happens, stay pretty consistent and could last forever, theoretically. If you don't, since you have no need of any carbon from outside, everything you need is right here.
So how would the water get back?
Well, what happens to the water when it's heated up by the air, by the light, right? Evaporates, goes in the air. What happens when it hits this cool surface up here in the plastic cover? It condenses, it drops,
So
and then it rains down.
Back from the energy that the plants use.
Say that again?
So you know how plants use water? Do you get the energy back from that? Water back from that? Because eventually it's water.
That's a good question. The plants are taking water out and breaking it up, right? Remember that? That's the first step in photosynthesis by photosystem 2. So it does that to make sugar. But what is the animal going to do with that oxygen that it releases? It makes CO2, releases it, but what's it going to do with the oxygen? It's not making CO2 with that oxygen. The CO2 comes from the sugar.
So where does the hydrogen come from?
From the water.
Yeah, but like to
But-
make the water again.
Oh, to make the water again, from the sugar.
Okay.
So where the question is, when what are the animals and the bacteria doing? They're making the water. In this system, if it's a closed system, what happens is when this snail, the bacteria, the fungi, when they eat the sugar, they make water again. Then the plant breaks up the water and makes sugar. Then the animals eat the sugar and make water. And it keeps going round and round and round and round. It's a cycle. The
So
circle of life.
Isn't it hot in there?
Yeah, hopefully not too hot. It can get too hot if you have too many animals producing too much CO2. If you have a little factory here making CO2, the CO2 could get so high that it traps the heat and it overheats the system and kills it. So that's what we think is happening with the world today. It's called global climate change.
So how does the snail get to the other side? The other side of the water.
Sometimes you say things that
Do
worry
they
me.
swim? Snails swim.
Yes. Moving on.
She said about the snail.
I don't know, man. Take a look at this. Flower characteristics. It says, appearance, insects are pollinated, often colorful. Those plants who are colorful, they're red and yellow and blue, you need insects to pollinate them. Those that are wind or water pollinated, in other words, the wind blows them, like dandelions, they don't have any color. You don't see any blue or red or yellow dandelions, do you?
No.
They're white or kind of gray.
I thought
Daisies are yellow. But these are once they blow in the wind, you know, they're white kind of looking things. They're not very colorful if they're blowing wind usually.
I got a question. What's that flower that's flying around and when it's like pollen season, it's like
That's a dandelion.
That's the dandelion. It looks like a lion. That's what lion's mane.
So
That's
it's
why they
like the
call
little,
it.
it's like the little ball bird that's flying up the road. So that's
Yeah. All right. So the reproductive part. Now, why do you think flowers have such color? Why is it that insects, the ones that are pollinated by insects, why are they the colorful ones? Say what?
You recognize it?
Yeah, but what's it do? What does color do? It attracts animals. That's what it does. The color attracts. Look, plants don't have eyes. What do they care what color their flower is? They need green to absorb the sunlight, but other than that, not really green. They need the pigments, the other pigments that absorb. The green's the one they don't absorb, right? But the other colors, all the other colors in a flower, ladies, you know what? I feel like I should just start naming names so that your parents know who it is that's, well, let me just say this. When I play this back for your parents, if they ever come in to have a discussion, we'll make sure they know it's you, right? Talking about all four young ladies that are constantly not on task.
I am this. I'm up here paying.
No one's? Okay. Poor little thing. All right, so anyways, plants that are colorful are pollinated by insects. They attract animals. That's the point. So it's called evolution, right? They're adapted to attract animals.
So where are plants and animals bigger?
Huh?
Why did plants and animals get smaller?
There are a lot of different reasons for adaptations. It all depends on the climate change and on the different conditions that are changing. How much food's available, how much water, what's the competition, what kinds of predators do they have. All these things kind of influence the direction of evolution. So I don't know if you would call a redwood tree small, because a redwood tree has been around for a few thousand years and they're giant. And so I can't imagine many plants or animals bigger than that.
It's like everything used to be bigger back in prehistoric.
So like birds.
We would think, but that's not always the case. For instance, the biggest living organism ever is a blue whale, and it's alive right now. They're swimming in the ocean. They're the biggest that ever were. And they evolved more recently. They were here after the dinosaurs. So blue whales being the largest mammal, right? Mammals didn't evolve until after the dinosaurs left. It's actually a mammal that's the largest of the beasts that have been on this ship.
Birds. So like a whale.
I don't know what she's saying, but I'm going to move on. I got to focus. During extreme conditions like drought or high heat, frogs will dig a hole in the soil and bury themselves. Sometimes frogs will shed a layer of skin and wrap it around themselves for more protection. Wait for the rain. How does this adaptation aid frogs?
Wait, if there's already a layer of skin, how does it help?
It acts like a membrane to keep the water in, so as they lose water, it condenses on the other layer. So it's like having a plastic sheet that keeps the water in. Because think of a desert frog. You know there are frogs that live in the desert. Did you know that?
Yeah.
And they spend years underground waiting for the rain. They hibernate.
How do they get water from underground?
No, they don't. They don't get water. They just don't use it. All right, we're going to continue this all week long. I'm telling you I'm going to collect the notes. I'm telling you ahead of time. They need to be in... come here, dear. Cornell notes, and I expect details. Thank you. Materials. So, again, when it comes to butterflies, what will happen is, again, not knowing how exactly it happens, the embryos will develop, and then they'll turn into caterpillars. After the caterpillar spends some time eating, after the caterpillars, now there's no exoskeleton, right? So caterpillars are soft. So are the maggots, right? The maggots, when houseflies mate, they're also soft. Maggots, houseflies will lay their embryos, their eggs, on poop or on dead things. These are very important organisms, by the way. Flies are incredibly important. We would be knee-deep in dead things if it wasn't for flies. So things die every day. And the reason you don't see them every day is because, thanks to God, the flies are out there getting rid of them for us. Poop. Things poop every day. Why don't you see poop everywhere? Because the flies, the maggots, get rid of it. So when you see flies and you're like, oh my God, so disgusting. Look, there's part of nature. They help break down that material. So they lay their embryos on these dead things, on the feces. The maggots eat that stuff. Now it goes through the next step in the life cycle of these organisms is they have to mature, and when they mature, they go through something called metamorphosis, where in the case of a butterfly or a moth, you get a butterfly or a moth. They make a cocoon hanging from a leaf. They turn into a butterfly. The flies also do this. They go through metamorphosis, and of course they go from a maggot to a fly. So this is the process of the life cycle, and of course the flies go and mate. This stage of the organism, though, only lasts a short time. How long? It depends on the beast. Houseflies last 1 or 2 days. When you see a housefly, it's only going to live for 1 or 2 days. Its only objective, when you're seeing the housefly, the only objective that a housefly has is to find a mate, eat some food because it needs energy, right? Everything needs energy. Eat some food, find a mate, have babies, and it's going to die in a couple days. If you ever get them stuck in the house, all you got to do is wait till dusk instead of trying to spend all day driving yourself crazy hunting them. Just wait till dusk, till the sun's going down, open up the windows, turn off all the lights in the house, and open up a window where the fly, because you'll see, where's the fly going to be? By the window. They're trying to get out. You're killing them because you're like, get out of here, and they're trying to get out, but they can't. Listen, you're not listening. Turn all the lights off, and it has to be dusk outside. The sun has to be going down, so it's dark inside, light outside. Open the window, wait a minute, they'll fly out. Now be careful, mosquitoes will fly in because they're searching for you.
Hey, we ain't gonna jump y'all. Come on.
All right. So mutualism, the relationship between flowering plants and bees. Flowering plants and bees. Do plants benefit from the bees?
Yes, most definitely.
Do bees benefit from the plants? So that's called mutualism, where they're both benefiting. What if you had a pitcher plant, and the pitcher plant doesn't need mosquitoes, but the pitcher plant catches water? So the pitcher plant looks like this. Has a pitcher. has leaves. It's like a little vine, whatever, and it has water inside it. A mosquito comes along and lays its eggs in the water, and now you have all these little baby mosquitoes. Of course, it sucked your blood already, so mix a little blood in there. So the female mosquitoes, that's why they suck your blood, so they need blood for their babies, not for them. So they lay their embryos are developing, they need water, they need still water. The pitcher plant gets no benefit from this. They don't benefit from the mosquito at all. They don't get hurt by the mosquito, but they don't get benefited by the mosquito. The mosquito lays their eggs, they benefit from the plant. What kind of relationship do they have? Yeah.
Is it the first one? I don't know how to say it.
I'm go ahead. What were you saying?
So I was gonna say the exact same thing.
Yes, it's right. It's commensalism. Commensalism is when one benefits and the other does not. Parasitism, obviously, the parasite benefits and it hurts the other, right? And predation, obviously, no matter what anybody tells you, the prey gets hurt and the predator benefits, right? So that's the relationship with these. Are we good? Notice that you knew the answers, but if you would have spent time when you were given this opportunity to go over this material that we've already covered, and you would have looked at these and asked yourself, I know that mutualism, we're mutually a benefit, but do I know the others? Do I know what the others do? And if you knew it, good, but I suspect a lot of people didn't, and they just blew the question off because they already knew the answer. Now here is, oh, look at this one. What do you notice? What kind of curve is this?
Logistic.
Logistic curve. What do you think this is representing?
The
Carrying capacity. There it is.
Mr. Mendoza. Mr. Mendoza.
Yeah,
Isn't like right where it like starts to go up, isn't that exponential growth?
that's right. So this part right here is exponential growth. But somewhere around here, it starts to do what? Somewhere around there, it starts to slow down. Right? It has to slow down somewhere around there, right? Because it's turning, the direction is changing. That's right. It's coming close to the carrying capacity. It starts to slow down. What does that mean, slowing down? They're dying. All right, so that's enough of that. Again, had you spent some time over spring break to look at that question, really look at it, you would have noticed it. We had discussed it a little bit in the fall. All right, which of the following has contributed most to the overall warming of the Earth's atmosphere? I mean, I hope by now everyone knows burning fossil fuels. Why? What do they do? It's release. It's not just creating heat. You're right, it creates heat. That does contribute slightly. But the big thing is what? CO2. No. That's a good point. The ozone layer is repaired. We repaired the ozone layer by stopping a production or slowing down a production of these things called CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons. We stopped these. These are done. Because of that, President Reagan did this, by the way, along with Margaret Thatcher. They stopped CFCs, and by doing that, the hole in the ozone now is pretty much back to the way it was before we poisoned it, the Earth. CO2, though, is building up in the atmosphere. As CO2 builds up, why is CO2 build up? Because we're burning things, right? As CO2 stores heat, it stores heat, solar energy. Every year, the average temperature of the planet goes up by whatever. And every year, as the years get hotter and hotter, more and more ice is melting. 3 great ice shelves are one ice shelf already broke. 2 more great ice shelves that are holding back massive amounts of ice, fresh water, on top of the land in Antarctica are going to burst. And when they do, it could raise the ocean's sea level by 2 feet. If that happens, there's going to be flooding in many coastal areas. New York, New Jersey, Florida, Puerto Rico, Indonesia, England.
Wait, how many major ice caps are there?
Well, these are ice shelves, and we'll talk about, I'm going to show you a video tomorrow on it. But there's just these, in fact, I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you tonight. You guys can watch it for homework. Yeah?
So, if the world, like, gets together and basically tries to stop what's happening, with the conversion of fossil fuels, could we, like, repair everything that's happened to the ice?
Yeah, amen, yes. Now, I have to say, at this point, we can't stop it. At this point, all we can do is slow it down. If we did what everybody's told us we should be doing, which is starting to move towards all the things we talked about already, right? Reducing our dependence on meat. You don't have to get rid of meat, but reduce it. Reduce our dependence on fossil fuels by increasing solar power usage, wind power. Now, unfortunately, the administration that's presently in charge is against this. They want to keep burning coal. Coal is, yes. The coal is cheap, and there's a lot of people that depend on it for their jobs. I'm not making fun of that. That's real. However, there's a bigger problem, and that's the production, burning coal and burning gasoline for engines are really going to cause a problem for future generations. People on the coast especially, you're living in actually one of the perfect places to live, just so you know. Living here, you have a giant water supply, at least for the short-term future. Who knows what happens in 30 or 40 years, but for a short-term future, you have fresh water, and you're not by the ocean. Because within your lifetime, it's likely the ocean sea levels are going to rise. And that's a real problem. I'm not sure how Saudi Arabia, how any of the Middle Eastern countries, Israel, Palestine, however you want to call it, I don't know how these countries are going to deal with this. You're not going to be able to build a wall big enough. And even if you build the wall 2 feet or 4 feet high to stop the water from coming in, eventually there's going to be a bad storm and the waves are going to roll over it. That's what happened in New Jersey with Hurricane Sandy. In any case, it's a problem. Yes, can we stop? Can we repair? Yes. By the time, if we did everything tomorrow, we still can't stop it, right? Global warming's here. It happened. But we could slow it down and start to reverse it, and we think that if we do these things, by the time your grandchildren are getting to be ready to have kids, yeah, over 100 years, yeah, we'll all be dead. We'll all be dead. But are you worried about you, or are you worried about the future? I don't know. I think I don't have kids, but I worry about the kids. And I worry about you. I don't have to worry about this. This is not going to impact me. That's how a lot of rich people and people that sell coal, that's how they're thinking, right? This ain't my problem. I'm going to drive my big truck. I'm going to burn my fuel. I got no issues. But what about the kids? What about the great? I'll be dead before the ocean levels rise so much that places go underwater. But eventually my nephews and my nieces and you will have to deal with it. When you're my age, certainly you're going to have to deal with it. And by the way, it's not just rising oceans. It's major weather changes. All this kinetic energy, heat is kinetic energy. So all that extra kinetic energy in the atmosphere is going to make the weather more volatile, bigger storms. It's going to change the climate in ways that we can't predict. Like, let's say, a winter storm in April. Oh, one's happening, isn't it? Did you know that?
I saw that on the news.
What was happening?
2 feet of snow it was predicted yesterday, 2 feet of snow in Nebraska, right now. Ouch. Montana, in April. Now, is that completely unheard of? No. But we expect more of these. How about some odd number of tornadoes all in one day? Already happened. What about a really big hurricane? Bigger hurricanes, more powerful hurricanes. Oh yeah, they happen. So these things are already happening. All it's going to do is just cause disruption to the economy, disruption to your lives. It's not like everybody's dead, right? It just means disruption. Disruption of the food production, because now you have a giant snowstorm. By the way, the Midwest has been dealing with floods, major floods. There's disaster areas already all throughout the Midwest. And now there's a giant storm. The problem is not just the big 2 feet of snow. The problem is that in a couple days after the snow comes in and leaves, guess what's going to happen? It's all going to melt. And now you're going to have more flooding in areas that have already been flooded. So that flooding is going to take away the soil. It's going to take away the land, the houses, the buildings, the schools. You have to rebuild all that. You're going to need to use CO2 to do that, right? You have to burn fossil fuels to do all that. So that's going to this is called the positive feedback loop, right? More CO2, the hotter it is, the crazier the weather, the more CO2 you have to burn to fix all the problems, the more CO2 you burn, the hotter it is, over and over and over. There is a way to fix it. It just costs money. You have to give up, you have to stop burning coal. Stop burning gasoline. Do we have the technology? Yes. Would it take an effort? Yes. Would it mean changing our lifestyles? Would it be uncomfortable? Yes. But will one person do it by themselves? No. We have to do it as a nation. We are the biggest user of all the resources on the planet. So it's not just China and Indonesia and all the other countries of the planet. It's the United States. The United States is the biggest user of these resources. Children like you have sued the federal government to stop them from doing this, to make sure that they are taking this job seriously. They sued Obama. And now they're suing the Trump administration. And it's in the court. It's not the president's getting sued, it's the federal government. Because the federal government, they feel, is not done enough to secure their future. I don't disagree with them. I agree with them. I hope they win. The Supreme Court ruled that they do have a right to file the suit. Yeah.
I don't really know a lot about what's going on, but I was doing some reading, and I guess there's like this little thing that's going on, there's like people it's called the green something, I don't know, but it's like a big movement of people.
The green, there's a new congresswoman named Ocasio, and it's really political. I don't like to talk about politics and science, but unfortunately it is a topic you're bringing up. And I'll say this, that Ocasio is bringing up the idea of making some of these changes that you're talking about. And almost all the major established politicians are like, wait, that's going to disrupt our whole economy. And so you've got to understand, you've got to balance what you're talking about, which is trying to save the planet, with making sure people can eat. Because what's going to happen if people don't eat? Well, before you're going to do everything you can not to die. So you're going to steal. There's going to be, you know what I'm saying? There's going to be all kinds of chaos that's going to happen in order, if you start to have people out of jobs. If you can't pay your bills, what are you going to do if you don't get to play your PlayStation? You don't get a phone. Your parents don't have food or money. There's going to be chaos. You see it happening in Central and South America. People wonder, why are all these people trying to come to our southern border? Why do you think? Because of all the chaos that's happening. Syrians, by the millions, leaving Syria to go to Europe. Where are all these refugees coming from? Why are they trying to come here? They're trying to attack us. They're invading. They're not invading you, people. They're suffering. They're trying to escape suffering. That's what people do. So you have to understand that whatever the government decides to do in the end has to be balanced, has to be a way it's going to take a lot of thought. There are solutions. They're just going to take a lot of thought. And you're going to have to, look, I am and was obese. I'm losing weight. What does it take to lose weight? Effort. Pain. Pain. Effort and dedication. It takes, let me tell you something. Don't you think I want to eat the cheeseburger? Don't you think I want to relax? Do you think I like going and exercising? No, yes, no, right? I want to eat my hot chips and sit in front of the TV and veg out? Yes. And just relax. It's my generation's saying.
You said binge?
Veg, like a vegetable, lay like a vegetable.
Oh, I thought you said binge watch.
No, veg out. All right. I don't care that you never heard it before. Too bad. So the bottom line is, we're going to have to make some serious, deep changes, and it's across the board. It's in things that you haven't ever even thought about. All right. So I got to move on. Oh, look at this. What do we see here?
Wait.
A strand of DNA. A strand of DNA has CTGCAT. What is the sequence of nucleotides? C goes with T goes with C, G with C with D, A with T. So again, easy if you know it. What about this? Which amino acid sequence can be coded from the DNA sequence CAG, TAG, CGA? How do we do it? CAG, that's right. You better turn into RNA first. CAG is what? GUC. Then what's the next one?
AUC.
The next one?
GCU.
So GUC, GUC is valine. Is going to be connected to AUC, which is isoleucine. Which is connected to GCU, which is alanine. And that's your, now I bet you that people got this, if they would have tried it on their own, would have got it wrong. Because they would not have done what? Turned it into RNA first. DNA to RNA, RNA leaves the nucleus, goes and finds the ribosomes, then you make the DNA. The protein. All right, so we'll continue this tomorrow. I'm going to send you a video to watch tonight. Please watch it. I have another video. It's going to be this one. I'll be posting it this weekend. You can watch it if you like.
Can we write a report on it?
Let's not make it extra credit. Let's say a report will have to be made for credit by Monday. How's that?